begin.
What is up, everyone? Vanlin here, Nate McComb, as I'm, that's my actual name. I do all the DevRel here with the Virtual Athletics League, and this is actually going to be our fifth panel discussion on the topic of, well, this one actually is going to be on the topic of tabletop gaming in VR. And so joining me today are Geoffrey Zatkin from Experiment 7 Games, the studio behind Catan VR, and I apologize in advance because I'm probably going to butcher his name, but Alejandro Anguizula. Did I get that right?
Anguizula. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for being here today. Really super appreciate it. So, so as I was saying, this is the fifth panel as part of our VR Winter Games for the 2022 season panel discussion, and so we're super excited to have you here. Real quick, just so that the people that are watching can be somewhat acquainted with you guys, why don't you just kind of talk about your games coming up, any announcements you want to make, and just familiarize yourself.
Would you like first?
You spoke up first, so go ahead.
Oh, gotcha. Hi, I'm Geoffrey Zatkin. I run the studio Experiment 7 with my partner Dimitri Detsarides. Our last game we put out was Catan VR, which is a tabletop license of Catan. We've also done a Dungeons and Dragons properties and a couple of other things, and I've been a game designer for 25 years now. First game commercial was Everquest, done a whole bunch of stuff in between, and I also run the YouTube channel Extra Credits.
You keep yourself quite busy.
Got to do it.
All right, Alejandro.
Hey, well, I'm from Mercis Games, and we're developing Questhaven, an upcoming tabletop RPG platform for playing RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons and others.
Yeah. And just so the audience knows, like, I actually, Alejandro was kind enough to give me a kind of sneak peek view of their game coming up, which, by the way, will be on Kickstarter starting, what was it, March
22nd. That's 22nd. Tuesday.
Yeah, so I knew it was next week. I'm like, I knew it was one of the two. So, but yeah, no, it is. I will say this: it is a beautiful world builder they put together for this. I cannot praise it enough. And I'm really excited to see how your guys' Kickstarter does.
Well, me too. We're very excited as well.
Yeah. Well, I bet you're more excited than either one of us here. So. Right on.
Excited and nervous and everything in between, because Kickstarter, actually, just curious, Kickstarter's a beast. You guys feeling pretty prepared?
Yeah. We've been preparing for a few months now. And we've been waiting to have it like right at the right stage to hit Kickstarter.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Well, I do have to say, like I said, I am extremely impressed with what you guys have done, and I'm very excited for your Kickstarter. And also, Geoffrey, I've introduced several friends in my family to Catan VR, and they've all walked away just being like, that was absolutely amazing. So
awesome.
You've put together quality product, both of you. Like I was saying, we're here today to talk about tabletop gaming in VR, kind of its future, kind of its role. And I've got, several questions for you guys, but for anyone on chat, feel free to chime in. We are more than happy to hear from you, because I'm sure that my voice will get irritating after a while. So, that having been said, so this is one for both of you here. I guess kind of in a general sense, because tabletop isn't something that people immediately equate with VR. Apart from being able to connect virtually with anyone, just kind of anywhere in the world, in your opinion, what is the biggest thing that tabletop gaming in VR brings to, the table, I guess, that traditional gameplay doesn't? Like traditional group play at a table doesn't, I mean.
I think one of the biggest things, I'll go back to the very first commercial game I did, which was EverQuest, and before that, Muds. We made EverQuest because it was so hard to get everybody together for a game of D&D. It'd be like, if you're lucky, you can get everybody together once, a week on a Friday night or something. And we wanted to make a game that would connect and you could hop in anywhere at any time and be with your friends from anywhere in the world. And in some cases, VR with tabletop is the exact same premise. All those friends you had in college or in high school or your family, and everybody was, just spread to the four winds at this point. Being able to get them back together to sit around a table again is really interesting. And one of the biggest things about VR is VR brings presence. that's one of the killer apps of VR is it can
Sure.
feel like you're at a place or you're sitting down with people. And if you have good avatars and positional audio and everything, you can actually make it feel like you're sitting across a table from someone. And with ambient body movement, your brain actually gets hacked into thinking you're sitting there with these people that you know or new friends you don't know. And so this is literally the closest approximation we're going to get until we get a holodeck of being able to get together with your friends anytime, anywhere around the world, and all sit around together and play, tabletop role-playing games, board games again, just like we used to.
Yeah, for sure. Alejandro?
Yeah, I 100% agree with the presence. It's just not the same as when you're just if you're on a video call versus actually being there and kind of feeling the proximity to your friends. Aside from like the distance factor, right? There's the fact that since it's virtual, there's many things that you can do. In our case, for example, we have an RPG system where you can move the figures around, similar as to how you would do on a table. But since there's a whole role play element to it, we decided to do away with the table. So now you have the figure and you can move it, but you have the equivalent of an entire room to play around inside, and not just a table. Also, certain things like, for example, jumping inside your figure and seeing the perspective of your figure is something that you wouldn't be able to do outside of VR.
No, that's true. So one other thing that literally just occurred to me while you were talking, it's all the fun of the game with absolutely none of the cleanup.
Oh yeah, cleanup, setup. For tabletop, setting up a game can take a while. Putting it away can take a while. Nobody's cat jumps on the table and accidentally disrupts the pieces. If you need to leave it for later, you're not taking up the dining room table for a week. I mean, there's a lot of advantages to doing a virtual space that still feels like a physical present space.
Yeah, like I had my sister-in-law and her husband and a good friend of mine over a couple of weeks ago to play like Firefly on our kitchen table, and it was that game. I set it up an hour before they got here because it just takes that long. So something like this, it's perfect for doing this.
Click button, ready to go.
I know, it's great.
The other day I was thinking about that. I was testing the physics on the figures. So I started grabbing them and tossing them as I was testing them. And when I finished tossing all of them across the room, I was like, boy, am I glad that I don't need to go and pick them up.
Right on. Well, what's been one of the biggest challenges that you guys have found to getting traction on like the VR space when it comes to tabletop gaming, and trying to convince people the benefits of it over, the traditional sit around the table gaming?
I don't think it's an either or, actually. Like I don't think, at least for us, we were never trying to say should be done instead of physical tabletop. It's giving you an extra option. It's like having a mobile phone. Now you can play games on the go, or having a console. Now you can play games in your living room as opposed to just where your PC is. It's giving you more options of how to play and when to play, as opposed to necessarily switching you from one thing to another.
Sure. Alejandro.
Well, about traction, we're just getting started, so the experience with traction is limited. But I agree that it's not the either or. Like being around the table with your friends is definitely going to be the, it's the great experience of being able to share the snacks and everything. So long as depends on the table's rules. That being said, as we were mentioning, just having the presence inside VR, it really helps bridge that gap. And having social experience, the around the table social experience, even if it's virtual.
But if you're looking for traction on development, I'd say it's still just hardware install base. That if you're going to go make a game for PC, you have hundreds of millions of people that could buy your game. If you're going to go make it for the latest Xbox, that's what they're like 40 or 50 million Xboxes. That we don't have that many people yet in VR, which means that it's you just have to design with a more cautious scope because of how much you can afford to build. But that, of course, changes the more VR we get.
No, and that makes complete sense. So Geoffrey, this one's kind of a little more aimed at you and what you're doing.
Yeah.
With third-party programs like Tabletop Simulator, for example, where you've got where it's VR capable, and you've had people make mods and whatnot to build Catan. What is your argument as to why Catan VR would be superior as to say like a user-made mod that they could be able to play in VR?
A couple. Number one, we're officially licensed, which means that the people getting the money are the people who actually made Catan, and that, not to be funny, for everybody else, they're stealing property. Like if I went and made somebody else's game in that and then got other people to play it, that is like saying I'm going to go, make a copy of the rules of Dungeons and Dragons and do that instead of going out and buying the player's handbook. Number two is server authentication. Tabletop VR doesn't authenticate the things in the background. So you're basically trusting that you're going to move correctly, that you're not going to take 2 cards, that you won't take an extra wheat. There's no backup server behind it to enforce the rules. With our version, at least, we're server authenticated, which means there's no cheating. You won't perhaps play wrong. And it's just an entire experience built for a specific game. Tabletop Simulator and things like that are really excellent for building your own games or test. I know a lot of designers that test their builds in it before they go program it themselves. But it's also very much an open source platform. And there is a lot of piracy involved in it. And a lot of people who make cool things who don't get paid because other people go and rip them off. And I'm worried, like I would never want to be running that because I think one day they're going to be hit with a huge liability lawsuit and possibly go out of business.
No, and I can see where you're coming from on that. And again, I apologize if there was any offense taken on that.
Oh, no.
Okay.
We get asked that question all the time.
Okay.
Anybody making a game that can be played on a board will be like, why don't you go make it in Tabletop Simulator? And the answer is, do you want to go build it with Legos or do you want to go build the real thing?
Exactly. So no, it makes, and you bring up a lot of good points that I hadn't even honestly considered, especially when it comes to server authentication and whatnot, because you do kind of have to just trust the people you're playing with, to be honest.
Like you guys could never use that if you want to run a league. If you want to run something where you're like, who's the best of the best? You don't have to worry about cheating or anything else. You need something with back-end server authentication. Otherwise, you have to trust everybody's playing 100% honest, and that's great, but that's not a way to run a tournament. No,
it's not. And believe me, we've run into numerous issues with running tournaments. We'd like to think we've smoothed a lot of them out at this point. Right on. So kind of following up on the previous questions, looping back a little to earlier. As we're seeing restrictions from COVID kind of be rolled back, as we're seeing the world come back to some semblance of normalcy. It's pretty obvious that COVID played a huge role in the rise of VR. And honestly, I'd credit that credit. And the Quest 2 being so widespread and accessible and cheaper than a current gen console to the prolific rise of VR relative to where it's been. Do you think with these restrictions being rolled back, we're going to start seeing a decline overall? And do you think that's going to impact, either of your titles?
Personally, I don't see it going that way. In general, I believe, yes, part of the growth was due to the whole pandemic and being locked up. But at the same time, it's similar to how you've got your cell phones and people will play on their cell phone these games online before the pandemic. Like, for example, tabletops, many people have been playing them online for a long time now. Also, the fact that, in my personal case, my group where we played D&D, we used to gather together and play. But now we've included people who are farther away. And now, the social dynamic has changed. I believe it's going to be an ongoing change.
Yeah, sometimes it just takes an event to get people to try something new. Looks like.
Yeah, Alejandro, you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Your video just cut out.
My camera bugged.
Yeah.
It takes
Let me see if I can
something to
fix it.
get people to try something new. So like same kind of thing. I'm actually playing D&D now in a campaign with a whole bunch of my old college friends that are spread all over the country that we never did before because we were just going off of proximity. And now we're going off of, the ability that we're like, hey, some of this virtual stuff is pretty good. But part of it for the pandemic, as much as it helped, there were also supply chain issues that there were a lot of people who wanted to get things that couldn't for a while. I mean, I know people who still don't have a PS5 that want one, for example, that, things are backed up because of it. And so it did increase demand. And also, once you buy VR, it's not like you have to buy a new VR headset every 6 months. The fact that you now have the hardware means that you probably go look for things to do with it. You look for more games, you look for more experiences. And if you're having a good time, you invite your friends on. So any boost that gets more people into the ecosystem kind of becomes self-perpetuating as long as there's good stuff to do in that environment. So I think the boost that the pandemic gave it will probably just continue to spiral up because it slotted more people in, which is more people to play and more people to pull their friends in and more people be like, hey, check this out. It's really cool. And it just kind of keeps going.
For sure. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention, and also as more people play on VR and bring their friends, also just people seeing others playing VR. We've been doing lots of posts on Reddit, and I've had lots of people like, oh, I want to try VR for the first time just because of tabletops.
Yep.
So like there has been an adoption rate, and it's still going to keep growing.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we need it to. I mean, this is the hardest thing is, what's really weird if you think about it, can you think of the last time we introduced new consumer hardware, like to be adopted? Cell phones weren't it. We had dumb phones before. Tablets came from laptops, which came from, desktops. We've had consoles for over 30 or 40 years. TVs haven't really changed. Like, what's a new entertainment thing? Hardware you had to buy and convince people, we need to go buy this. It's really hard to think of a new one that we've had in some cases in our lifetime that's been just a whole new thing that hasn't been an evolution of a previous thing where people are like, oh yeah, it's like that, but better. And that's one of the reasons it's been such an interesting thing to adopt. And in some cases, it's so hard to show off because until you try VR, you don't know how cool it is.
Yeah.
It's hard to just kind of look and be like, oh, that, you can think that looks cool, but until you try it, you don't actually know. And it's also really hard hardware to demo. Like you can walk up and look at somebody's TV and be like, that looks cool. If you look up and look at somebody's VR hardware until you try it on, you don't actually know.
Mm-hmm.
There's that extra level of showing it off that's just really hard to get the consumer adoption for. So things that get more people, it's interesting that it's been slower, but it's not a surprise.
Well, and one thing that we've seen over the last few years is that there was a lot of interest in VR, like in about 2016, and then everything kind of just died in the industry for a few years. It really the pandemic really ended up being kind of the shot in the arm to reignite interest.
Yeah.
Which I'm grateful for because that gives me a job, but well, it gives all of us jobs actually, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's an argument to be made there. I mean, the whole Meta Oculus Quest headset at $300, I believe, was also a very important factor just because of the accessibility price-wise.
Yeah.
And just in general in the industry, I feel like it's going to keep growing and synergizing with mixed reality and augmented reality, where I know that the theme is a VR, but as those other fields grow, they're going to sort of feed into. I believe they're going to synergize and work together, and it'll bring more people into virtual reality as well.
10 years from now, your VR headset's going to look like this. It's going to be a set of glasses you slip on that'll be passed through for AR. They'll get dark for VR, and you'll probably have something the size of this nearby that'll Bluetooth something near field communication up to your glasses, and people use them all the time. Like we're still iterating through our hardware to get to the actual really, really cool stuff.
And at that point, I wouldn't be surprised if people use them or like being around the table with each other and still using some version of VR around.
That's what the actual metaverse will be. Their actual metaverse is probably 10 years out, and it's going to be the intersection of digital and physical overlapping at the same time, where it's just super common mainstream.
The convergence, as you will.
Yeah.
So,
One of the many convert, not the one where AI takes over. Or no, excuse me, that's the singularity.
Hopefully.
oh yeah, that's a singularity where we all become slaves to Skynet.
Well, hopefully we'll all at least get lattes, and it'll all be okay.
But it's funny you mentioned the glasses thing, because if you I don't know if either of you saw Facebook Live back in 2020 when they first announced the Quest 2, but they actually, that was one of the products that they were talking about was in beta development, was a sort of glasses product. If I'm remembering this correctly, obviously a couple of years ago at this point, but that did work in that sort of way. I mean, very rudimentary with AR and whatnot, but it did it was picking up where Google I can't say it. Google Glass which kind of failed.
Actually, what's really funny? Google Glass was actually wildly successful. It was just not a good consumer product. Like the industry adoption for things like doctors or warehouse workers or technicians was actually very successful. And they're coming out with the next Google Glass. Like as a warehouse worker, being able to walk around and look at every box and know what's inside of it. Or, I mean, there's some really cool stuff they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
But again, it's just, to get consumer adoption is really hard. It's what Alejandro was talking about. It's the price point, it's the accessibility, it's enough stuff that it's this whole thing. But that's one of the exciting parts about working. I started my VR studio in 2016, and we were doing some pretty bleeding edge stuff. And we moved from bleeding edge to cutting edge, but mainstream is still coming. Like, the hardware keeps getting better, and there's still lots of things. Like my wife still has a hard time putting on a headset because it smudges her makeup. Half of our population has worries about that. And, there's people who get motion sick. By the way, tabletop games, nobody gets motion sick. We're the best games for nobody ever getting motion sick.
This is
ever,
true.
because you don't have to move a camera in the same way. So there's still lots of cool stuff to figure out. And that's one of the really interesting things always about part of being the bleeding edge and the cutting edge is you're the people who get to set up. This is what we think is best practice. And everybody else looks at that and builds their things based on what you did. And so you get to be a part of the history of gaming.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool to be kind of at, like you said, this cutting edge of where the industry's headed. And I say this, obviously I have a bias, but I really do think that VR is kind of the future of not just gaming industry, but numerous industries out there. I mean, if you think about it, how much easier is it to train someone to operate a forklift in VR where they don't actually have the risk of damaging product or anything, as opposed to actually having them in the warehouse potentially damaging product.
I actually met somebody 2 Oculus Connects, or Facebook Connect, whatever the conference is called, ago. His whole job was they built simulators for the really tall cranes to teach people to use them so that you weren't knocking over buildings. He's like, business is great right now. That, you're absolutely right. There's whole industries adopting that nobody's thinking about unless you're in that industry, where it's just easier to train people when they can't accidentally, kill thousands of people with a mistake.
Yeah. Surgery, piloting, hard or actually heavy factory work, stuff like that. I mean, yeah, there's the implementations, the possibilities for VR are just endless.
A few months ago, I was seeing, I don't remember where I saw it, but it was a post for a job offer to become a robot trainer. So it was a delivery service, and the robot would be moving, but you could kind of intercede. And it was in VR. You would be in VR and telling the little, it was like a little car, delivery car, telling it when to stop, when to cross the road, that type of thing.
Is this, I wonder if that's related to the Domino's drone delivery that I've been seeing. It
was some sort of drone delivery. Not sure what it was.
That's an interesting hybrid of machine learning, because you let the machine learn, but you have a human going, wait. That one was stupid. Don't do that one.
It just felt like a very sci-fi job. It's like, I'm a robot trainer.
I mean, imagine explaining that to a Tinder date. Right on. So we do have a question here from chat. Timeless Fable is asking, how often should I expect to replace VR gear? Like with a gaming PC, you should plan on upgrading a part of it once every 4 years.
I would say, the really sucky part about getting in early is it's more often.
Yeah.
Like, I would say at this point, it's probably going to be every 2 years as a guess. Like, I mean, from when we started, we went through the Samsung Gear, the Rift, the Go, the Rift S, the Quest, or the Quest 2. I'm just thinking of all the ports we've had to do just within the Oculus ecosystem within a pretty short time span. And for a while, each of those, like the Rift, the Go, the Quest, and the Quest 2 were all considered like, okay, this is now the benchmark. And they just keep moving the benchmark on that. So it is more frequently. Alejandro, do you feel the same way right now?
I would say, I mean, I still have my Oculus Consumer Version 1, and it's, it still works, and I can still play many games with it, and for me, the experience is good enough. After trying a Quest, and because of development as well, I decided to upgrade. Actually, if you see, I've got 2 of them here.
Yeah.
For development. But like, I decided to upgrade because I wanted to. Similar to how, like, you can have a phone and you can change your phone every year, or you can change it every 4 years, and it's really going to be a personal decision.
Mm-hmm. The VR, though, is more like the phone in that right now there aren't hot swappable parts to the VR in the same way that, like, for a gaming PC, you can be like, oh, screw it, I just need more RAM, I need a better graphics card, I need to upgrade my hard drive. So that's why I was actually giving a lower number, is because you can't incrementally advance pieces of your hardware yet. And the Timeless Fable also said gaming. So I'm assuming basically they're always looking for I'll just call it a superior versus kind of what, the average experience you could be having. Because often gamers are looking for the things that run slightly better, faster. But it's really, it's always going to be up to consumer preference. But it's also really hard for studios. Like, we at this point maintain Catan on 8 separate platform/hardware SKUs. And it's hard because every time one of them updates, you have to go do that without disrupting the code for the rest for when you want to push out a release to all of them. So the more hardware that comes out, the harder it is to keep everything up to date, which means at a certain point you have to start dropping older hardware. And so it kind of, for developers, it ages itself out faster than it would if we were, say, doing, PC or console. Yeah. But again, those are just current logistic challenges.
And then again, that again translates to the relationship with phones, where it's like, well, phones get old and now you can't play certain apps on that phone. But changing it is like, do you need to? Maybe.
Yeah.
Or you just decide to go a longer time with it.
Right on. Well, thanks for answering that. I'm sure that's I'm hopeful that that's a good response for him. But it's interesting too that you mentioned that about how fast we do kind of go through stuff, because I remember when they announced the Quest 2 at Facebook Live 2020, I was like one of the first people in line to pre-order it. As soon as they announced it, I'm like, oh great, I got to go get this because it's starting cheap. But the problem is that they only had the 2 models. They had the 64 and the 256 gigabyte hard drives, and my wife was like, "Don't spend don't spend the money on the 256. If there had been a 128, that would have been perfect." And of course, a year later, they introduced the 128. And meanwhile, I'm deleting games off of my Quest to make room for new stuff that I need to try out for work. And it's just like, it's amazing how fast even small things like that can put what you currently have just completely out of date.
Yeah.
So
that used to be the console thing for a while too, where the consoles would come out and 2 years later they'd come out with a better hard drive. And as more and more things have moved digital, especially as more and more things move digital, and we're no longer slotting in physical discs or other things with the games on them, where the hard drive really makes a big difference.
Well, I mean, they're still kind of doing it because you have let's look at PlayStation, for example. You had the PS4, and then a couple years ago they released the PS4 Pro, which has like a 4K player and a bigger hard drive space and whatnot. And I'm sitting here just like, I don't have the money to upgrade it. I don't need a second PS4.
Actually, one of the reasons for that, everybody except Nintendo loses money on their consoles. That Sony and Microsoft put them out for a loss because they get a cut of every single game that gets sold. And so a couple years later, as the hardware gets cheaper, they can actually make better hardware and kind of at a break-even price because they don't have to update their processor or other things, because a PS4 needs to stay a PS4. You can't have like 5 different powered versions of it, because then developers would go crazy trying to develop for it. So yeah, it's just, that's an economics. Sorry, I've been in the industry a while. You learn these things and you're like, that's a thing nobody told me when I was getting in.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that was the reason. I thought they were just trying to, like Lord of the Rings it with like an extended edition type of deal.
Oh, they're doing that too, but they're also then extending their hardware life cycle. It makes it seem like less time between, say, the 4 and the 5 when you could buy a version or two. It gives them another thing to be selling and getting people excited with and keep them in, say, the PlayStation ecosystem, as opposed to going, oh, maybe I'll go buy an Xbox now. Yeah,
well, I mean, PS4 came out, I think, what was it, 2013? But you don't think that because they put out the PS4 so recently. Or the PS4 Pro, rather.
Yeah.
Rana, well, kind of looping back to the topic at hand that we are all here for. Not that I've not enjoyed the discussion we were having. So, sweet. Okay, so another one for Geoffrey here. So when I started playing Catan, I learned with at my best friend's place with like cities and nights and seafarers and whatnot. In fact, actually, this is what I use to carry all my Catan stuff these days. It's just that big. Yeah, no, it's
you could hurt somebody with that.
You could. You really, really could. Anyway, it was a great Christmas gift to my wife. But yeah, so I mean that's just how much there is to it. And Catan VR still is just kind of the base game right now.
Yep.
Do you have any plans to add any of the expansions to it?
So we initially did, and the reason we didn't at first was going back to install base, where let's use really easy numbers. Say for a moment you sold 1,000 copies of your game, and you're expecting 10% of your people to be online at any time. So you got 100 people online, and your average game of Catan, let's just say it takes half an hour. And so if you start thinking about how many are playing and how many are matchmaking at a time, if you get people in, they're playing a game, and those people are then unavailable for the matchmaking pool, you kind of need to get a big enough numbers that everybody always has a good experience playing against each other. As soon as you put an expansion out, you split your pool into the people with it and the people without it, who want to play with each, or who want a 4-player game versus a 6-player game. Then you put out the next expansion that's optional, and you split your pool into 3 different groupings. And so what we did was we very intentionally chose not to do any expansions out there because there weren't enough people playing in VR at the time. We decided, what did we want? Did we want faster matchmaking or more options for the game? And we thought about it long and hard, and we ended up deciding we wanted faster matchmaking. We wanted more people in the big pool so that you could just hop on and more quickly find a game. And at some point, as the audience gets bigger and bigger, we'll revisit those decisions. But that was, for us, a very decided trade-off of speed of matchmaking versus options. And we've had people who've hated that decision and who've loved that decision. But that was just kind of the one that we decided was right for the amount of people in VR at the time.
No, and that makes total sense. I mean that actually is a very reasonable explanation for it. As much as I feel like I miss out because it's really weird for me to go play just the base game. Well, because like I said, I learned with cities and nights, with seafarers and whatnot. So I get into the base game. I'm just like, where's the barbarian? Where are the commodity cards? Like, what's going on?
And that's such a hard thing because I still get messages every couple of days on Discord. It's like, hey, you guys doing expansions? And I get other people who are like, who are very happy with it because they only learn the base game, and other people learn multiple. And the problem is everybody has their own combination of which expansions they want off and on, and every one of those. So like if you have 2 things, then you could have 0 on, 1 on, 2 on. You end up getting 4 different variants out of that. You put in another one, you get up to 9 different variants. It's just the combinatoric math of how it splits the matchmaking pool is really interesting. And again, just makes it super hard to do up until you get like millions of people playing.
Yeah, and
or
that's totally
hundreds of
understandable.
thousands of people playing even.
And the numbers for VR just aren't there yet, unfortunately.
Right. And our length of game doesn't help. Like if we had a game that only took 3 minutes, people would be coming back into the matchmaking pool faster. But a game that takes half an hour to 40 minutes, those people come in much more slowly. Every game engages them for a longer period of time.
You see, you say half hour to 40 minutes. The fastest game I think I've ever played with my friend's family is like 3 hours.
Catan in VR is actually faster because you don't have to do the setup, the tear down, nobody knocks things over. You know, we automatically distribute resources when somebody rolls the dice. We actually did everything we could to optimize the speed of the experience, but without taking away any of the player's choices. But everything that was just kind of a thing that you would have to do manually that was a chore got automated to make it feel like a brisk new version of Catan.
Yeah, well, and that's been appreciated, that I'm sure. So Alejandro, I have a question for you now, because you know, you're at an interesting point in the development of the game. Well, first off, are you nervous? You excited, nervous? How do you feel about your
Both?
Kickstarter coming out?
Yes. Yeah, we're definitely both excited and nervous. You know, there's always the uncertainty. It's like, oh, how much is it going to pick up, and how fast? But in general, I would say more excited than nervous. Yeah.
So, you know, in your trailer, you highlight several different types of game modes. Like you've got your traditional sort of D&D-esque countryside type of thing. Then you show like space station. You show zombies. Just all these different things for like adventure games. How hard has that been to code in with the world builder you've put together in terms of like just different locales and everything? Have you had to restructure stuff, or
mostly there are some things there, but mostly it's optimizing all the models so that they run on the standalone headset. However, there are definitely some things. For example, in space, it's not the same when you're placing figures on a map on a terrain. You're just placing them. But in space, how do you reference where you want to place them, right? So one of the things we're thinking, but that still needs to be developed, is, well, maybe you're flying around, and as you're flying around, you drop them in front of you, because it's, you know, in space, it's just like you can have something over here and something floating somewhere else, and they're not relative to any specific point.
Oh, you guys are going to have scale issues too. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
We had to think a lot about scale initially, and especially we kind of freeform, where if you bring in a monster, or actually during one of these live events, we brought in a cow, and we grabbed the cow and we made the cow be like, allow the player to scale the cow up and make it a huge world-ending cow.
Wait, could you make it the size of the moon?
You can say that.
Sorry.
It's all good. Yeah, and I'm kind of laughing too, because I remember, you know, Black and White from way back in the day. That was my monster, was a giant cow. So, anyway, no, and that's cool that you're talking about, you know, 3D positioning and whatnot, because I'll tell you right now, like one of my favorite genres is RTS, because, you know, I'm a 90s kid, and that's when all the RTS came out. And so VR RTS is actually that one that we're going to. Timeless says there's no secret cow level, so we all know what he's referencing. Anywho, and so like in VR RTS, one of the things I've loved about some of the ones that I found is that they do work with an XYZ axis, and so the fact that you're talking about actually being able to incorporate that I'm actually really excited to see how that would work in terms of, you know, positioning and whatnot, especially if you're in space, because, you know, you can get altitude and whatnot.
Yeah,
and I think it's going to look great.
The other thing we've kind of played around with is, well, what if we just do a plane that you can bring up and down, and like you bring the plane up and then you start building things at this height. However, just like flying around and dropping them is a bit more free mode. We might end up having both options, honestly. That's like one thing that we're trying to do, is give the player the options to kind of play the way they want to play. We're kind of a sandbox experience almost.
So I guess what has been kind of your biggest overall challenge with the current state of development?
I would say the limiting the scope that we have, because we want to do a lot, and we're like, hold on, let's focus on this, and we want to get it into people's hands as quickly as possible. So, like development wise, I would say that, and yeah, like limiting ourselves.
Well,
That's one of the hardest things for development on anything is I don't think I've been making games since the late 90s. There's never been a game I've made or any other developer I've known that got everything they wanted in. Like, it has never happened in the history of gaming, I would posit, that everything you want to get into a game, you actually have time and money to get in. It's always what's the most important bit. And the hard part too is because games are often about iteration. You have to put part of it in and play with it, see is this fun? That in some cases you can't even know everything you want in there until you have other pieces in. And that means you have to get a certain amount along in development to get those in and play with them. To then go, oh wait, this means now we need a this. It's like, oh, now we need a this kind of placement system. And suddenly you're doing that and you realize, wait, we could turn that into this as well. And it's just that then you're like, is that more important than getting in X? And X might be really important. And you have to figure it out. And it's hard.
Yeah. We've been sort of doing a demo-driven approach where we've essentially like been building demos, but just for ourselves, but like trying to get everything in, get the level of polish that we want, so that we can experience it and then feel, oh yeah, well, this is going this direction, and it might iterate in another, but yeah, overall, always moving forward.
EA used to call those vertical slices, where it feels like you could play like an entire piece of the game, even if it wasn't the entire game, but up to almost like the level of polish you want it to end up at, so that you can really get in and play with it and say, oh, is this the thing I want? Which is fun.
Yeah.
I mean, so I would argue that there is one studio I know that's at least put everything they wanted to into the game, even if it's not been implemented. It is at least in the code, and that would be a Studio Wildcard with Ark, because it is the least optimized game I have ever seen. You dig through the files, you find just about every rejected project they have.
I actually know one of the developers from that, and I will sadly correct you. No, they did not actually get everything they wanted in, even with all of what you're talking about.
Could you tell them to optimize the game a bit better then?
He's no longer with the studio, but I know him, and I've had drinks with him and talked about games, and yeah.
I'm curious.
There may be cases that I have missed. Obviously, I am a person, but as a general thing, I'd be willing to say. But yeah.
Yeah, well, and I'm speaking more colloquially. Obviously, I think you're right. So,
no, I was just like, wait, I know a guy.
Yeah, no, but that is, I mean, as much as I've loved the game and the 3,800 hours I put into it, it is terribly optimized. Right on. So, when it comes to VR tabletop gaming, what's been the most effective way you found to make your game like stand out enough over like other games in this niche that you think would make people want to play it? Is there any method that works better than another? This might be more relevant for Geoffrey than Alejandro, since you guys haven't launched yet. So,
but even like Alejandro, I mean, they're doing one of the best things. They're showing cool things. Like, being able to show cool things is almost one of your strongest points. Like, one of the reasons we grabbed licenses, like long term, our studio was looking at doing something very similar to what Alejandro's group's doing. But, we shifted instead to focus on licensed games, because we very much were on the consumers are so new at this that they don't know what they want. They want to go grab this hardware and see a couple familiar titles to go, oh, well, of course I like Catan, I should pick that up. Because I've also worked in game research, and when people are unfamiliar with something, they go for familiar things to kind of get them in. And so, like, being early in the cycle, to stand out, we were choosing to do licenses. That we did like a kind of a D&D battle chess. We got Catan, things like that, so that people will be like, oh yeah, that's a thing I should pick up. But in a lot of cases too, showing coolness. But again, VR is so hard for that because you have to experience it to get the full depth of the coolness.
Yeah.
And VR is hard to demo.
It really is.
Did you have something more you wanted to add on that, Alejandro?
Well, like about the VR being difficult to demo, it's like once you're in there, it's this whole other thing.
Oh yeah.
As to one of the things we're trying to do to stand out more and to get that market penetration right is we feel like getting it on PC as well and allowing that crossplay for those who don't have VR is going to help a lot. And at the same time, it'll help those people who don't have VR, and all of a sudden they're seeing their friends move with IK and their controllers, like, oh, well, I want to be a part of that, so let me go and get some VR.
No, I mean, like you both have mentioned before, it's once you get someone into the headset, they really kind of understand just how cool it is. Like I'm gonna, kind of use an example from about a month ago. My wife and I went over to a friend's house for game day, and he's got a 9-year-old kid. We threw him into real VR fishing. He did not want to come out.
Nice.
And like when we finally pulled it off him, he's like, "Can we get real VR fishing?" Like he was begging his dad for a headset. Which I keep telling him, they're more affordable than ever. You should get one.
Right.
You and I could.
When you walk by and see them in Costco, you know that they're starting to really.
You've seen them in Costco?
I've seen, Quest 2s.
Really?
Yep.
We have
Last
the biggest.
month.
We have the biggest Costco in the world here, literally the biggest in the world. They pride themselves on that. And I've not seen a Quest 2 there once.
Wow. Supply chain issues again. Maybe we
got
some, but and that again, that's been one of the problems for a lot of groups. Like during development for some of our stuff, we were deving for Oculus, and they couldn't get us the hardware because of supply chain issues. Like, we know you're building for this, but we don't have any for you yet. Like, how do we finish building and optimizing for it? They're like, here's what the specs are going to be. We're like, yeah, thanks.
That's super helpful.
Get us the hardware.
Wow. I didn't realize supply chain issues were bad. You're struggling even then. So, right on. So one thing that I think gets taken for granted with VR tabletop is just the importance of a physics engine, which, if you think about it, in your game your games might be more essential than anything else because, like you don't want to bump someone's road out of the way, or you don't want to move a minifigurine. What's been your experience with trying to make a solid physics engine? Has it been a difficult? Have you had a lot of hurdles? How has it worked out for you?
Well, in my case, the physics, we're applying it to the objects when you grab them. Like, for example, the figures, when you grab it, it'll have physics, and if you let go, it'll fall down. But if you let it go a different way, it'll just stay floating. So, like, having that option there. Definitely we decided to go with physical dice just because we feel like it's such an important part of tabletop RPGs is kind of feeling the dice and seeing how they roll. Had to add a different way to make sure that it's random so people don't cheat with it. But that was more of an issue where it's like, well, what if you're rolling it and the dice goes downhill, and how do you get it to actually stop eventually, or not just keep shaking forever? So it was an issue, but something that we overcame.
We actually cheated a lot, and we used almost no physics. We animated almost everything. One of the things almost nobody thinks about Catan, like I went down and during the design process, I did a map of every possible interaction you could have with the game. And I flowcharted out every single one. And when we looked at it, we realized it was actually cheaper to animate most of the things than it was to put in a physics engine, considering all of the platforms we had to support, because some of them didn't have that much graphical computing power or just both CPU and GPU. And we knew we could deliver a good experience with animation that wouldn't necessarily happen with the computer doing the processing itself in the background. And so for one of the reasons we cheated was just the amount of hardware we were trying to get it on and making sure that it was a good experience for everybody and that we didn't have to do twice the work of animation for some and physics for the other, because that isn't actually time saving. That's just doubling your work.
Yeah.
And when you're putting together, when you're already deciding which features go in, it was okay, decide one way or the other. But I think we pulled it off well enough that almost nobody notices. And it's just, oh yeah, that looks right, that feels right. And it's just us, we had a good animator. So we spent our resources on that versus more engineering time with physics.
In the end, the feel is what matters.
Yeah, 100%.
Sure. I didn't know that you had everything animated, so
we're tricky that way.
you just did a good enough job. So right on. All right. Well, we are kind of bumping up against the end here, but for both of you, what's your favorite part about the games that you've made? And I'll let either one of you go first.
I think it's the people. I mean, getting in, I love making the game. The game's a fantastic experience, for ours. And I can say that having worked on a lot of games, we did pretty well with this one. It came off well, it plays well, but that's just there to get the people in and playing. It's really the people that make the game a great experience. And so I think for me, it's a combination of that and just, I love our visual aesthetic. I think getting into the game, it's pretty, it's relaxing. And we did more work than we should have on making the physical environments you play in, or the virtual environments you play in, feel like nice physical places. And I think that was actually one of the secrets to our success, is that we build nice places to go play games. And I love hanging out in them.
Alejandro?
In my case, I mean, aside from that, as we've mentioned a few times now, that presence and like that around the table experience that you get inside the VR, I would say the feature that I like the most is being able to jump into your figure and not only seeing the perspective of it, but seeing how the scale of the world changes. So, like, if you jump into a figure that's a dwarf, and you're looking up at someone like a large orc, all of a sudden you kind of like question twice, like, oh, I'm not going to say I'm going to chop its head off without describing how I'm going to accomplish that, because it's way up there. So just that sense of how the scale shifts inside VR is very interesting to me.
So do you guys have any concerns about people getting like just VR fatigue from being in the headset too long with your games? Is that a problem either of you have run into?
We worry a little bit. Actually, we worry about battery life sometimes, because games you play over 3 or 5 minutes, you're never going to run out of battery in the middle of a game. If you do get a game that stretches to an hour, like, the last thing you want is to be, 5 turns from done and run out of battery.
Yeah.
So kind of a combination of that. And yeah, one day we will have these as them, but right now you're still strapping pounds of gear onto your head. And so it is a thing where we just know the experience is good now, but it'll get better later.
Yeah, over here, even more so, like D&D campaigns, sessions, they're long, 3, 4, 5 hours is a normal session. So battery life is definitely a concern. There's a few things that we're looking into how to work that. Obviously, like, there's extended battery packs. But aside from that, if we are working on a way for the player to be able to have the headset and the game running on the computer at the same time. And when they're in the computer, they can just press a button and it'll populate on the headset. And if they press the button again, it'll go away from the headset and into the computer. And it's working great. There's definitely going to be challenges with that, but it'll allow for those longer sessions, as well as when you're playing D&D, there's in other tabletop RPGs, there's so many things you want to keep track of that, like your inventory, your character system, like some of them we're going to be able to track in VR, but maybe the GM might want to have more things that they need to track. You usually play with a journal and you write things down. So having that ability to hot swap between the two is definitely going to be an advantage.
One of the big things about that too is the fidelity or the graphical resolution right now is still getting better. So like trying to read things, setting up like book and reading environments can actually be very challenging in VR right now. Even looking at something like a character sheet, if you look at something like that's the same detail as a D&D one. So that can actually be one of the harder,
Yeah, we've got huge
surprisingly
numbers.
harder parts.
Yeah, like our character sheet right now is about the size of this wall back here. Like when you're in there, just because you need to see huge numbers, and you can grab it and take it out of the way or hide it. But definitely, and also like it depends on what headset you're using, and it'll keep depending on what headset you're using in the long run.
Oh, can I throw a piece of unsolicited advice, Alejandro? If you can toggle back and forth, look also if you lose connection from the headset to do an automatic toggle.
Yeah, that's actually one that that's the point where I was like, well, there's a few things, we're in development, and that's one that we need to figure out. Unfortunately, the automatic isn't as fast, and the getting connected back, like right now, I'm having to do it with the Oculus Link cable unless I find some other new thing. The alternative is just to have like literally two accounts or have the account logged into two places and just have them not rely on the computer at all, and just like, oh yeah, you're logged into your account and you have two copies of the same player networked. But yeah, things to figure out.
Sorry, we're getting into shop talk. It's just
sorry.
No, I'm totally happy with it. I mean, with you guys chatting like that, I want to see Alejandro succeed. So if you have tips for him, feel free.
So you could always throw a dead man switch in there. No input for X equals change over to Y. But yeah, it's just good. These are
also it's going to depend a lot with like from one headset to another.
Yeah, Nate, it's funny. All of the stuff some of the stuff you would think would be the super basics, or the stuff that VR development spends so much time with, just because again it's new and there aren't big tool sets built for this. If we were just over making an Xbox game in Unity, the amount of things you can plug in and they'll just work because people have figured them out and they're just part of the kit now, all aren't there on VR yet, because we're still pioneering and figuring it out.
Yeah, well, I mean,
they will be.
It's all unexplored territory right now, and that's one of the most exciting things about being in the VR industry, is just that you never know what else is coming down the pipeline, and what the new thing that people are going to figure out is. I mean, we're already starting to see full body tracking and whatnot start to make its way into the rounds, and we've come a long way from mid 90s with the Virtual Boy. So
Virtual Boy,
I remember trying that once. I'm just like, there's so much red. There's so much red. So
I've got one hidden away somewhere.
My parents never let me have one. We were always a console or two behind, just because they were like, it'll rot your brain, and they were probably right. But I can now rub in my dad's face that I get paid to play video games, and that's the important thing. So right on. Well, sweet. Real quick before we wrap up, anything else you guys want to share or say, or
go everybody go help Kickstarter Alejandro's game. That we need more good games out.
Right on. Sweet. Well, Geoffrey, Alejandro, thank you so much for being here with me today. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but we really appreciate you being here on this panel about, it was about tabletop VR, and kind of veered into several different things. Not that I'm complaining. So
thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Yeah, super appreciative that you're here. And remember, we still have the VR Winter Games going on. If you guys want to take part in any of our Gleam contests, you can check it out on valvr.com or onearena.gg. There are a lot of just easy to do things that you can get in to potentially win a Quest 2 for those of you who don't have one. But until tomorrow for our RTS and VR panel, I will see you guys later.
See you.